when the Buddha became enlightened, he spent 49 days processing the experience and kind of coming to terms with what he was going to do with this experience he had just had. And when he left the Bodhi tree and he was about to embark on his teachings, he had decided through his great compassion that he couldn't keep this gift to himself, that he was going to be the teaching Buddha. He immediately became very ill and almost died from the first food that he took. And he was challenged to die by his nemesis, Mara. And Mara said, die, because he was always trying to undercut the Buddha. And the Buddha said, no. And at that point, this is the story that's missing. He laid out his blueprint or his intention for becoming a Buddha. And if this story were told, if it had been told all along, I think all this gender imbalance would not even be here today. But he said, no, I can't die. He was 35 years old. He had just attained enlightenment. And he said, I have a job to do in the world. And he laid it out that his job was to bring the Dharma equally to the monastics, men and women, and the lay population, men and women. So this is the fourfold assembly that he committed to. I identify very much with what Cynthia is saying about the male hierarchy and the patriarchal structure that, you know, through especially the monastic world, because they were the literate ones who wrote the stories down, where women began to be erased almost as soon as there was literacy. But if we could go back to that original story where women were always part of his ministry, always part of his intention, not just to learn the Dharma, but to become wise and accomplished and to then become teachers. All across the four assembly, he wanted teachers, and we have today amazing women teachers, men teachers, monastic teachers, and so forth. This is the fulfillment of his mission. And this is where I think today we need a revival of recognizing equally the gender roles of men and women. And also he was egalitarian in terms of caste too. He did not discriminate, and it was a heavily casted system in early Buddhism. And he taught equally to men and women of any caste. So this is the story that I think needs to be brought back as the sort of the original Buddhist story.
I think that it's really important to emphasize this, because Mahaprajapati set out, when she first asked to be ordained, and with all her followers, her 500 followers, she checked with the Buddha whether or not women were capable of attaining enlightenment. And he said they were. And I think, Cynthia, Jesus obviously felt the same thing. As you say, you go into, I like this bit of your book very, very much, when you go into the shark-infested waters, as you call it, of Mary Magdalene actually, in a way, having her and Jesus having a strong relationship together, which was passionate on both sides. And she actually, I think you say at one point, that she actually helped Jesus evolve. So I wondered which is a kind of shocking for, I imagine, most church people to actually hear that she actually managed to teach him something. I wonder if you could expand a little bit on that too.
Jesus had to do a lot of rapid shifting in his inner sense of himself and his mission when he met Mary Magdalene. It was also to set up in the text that he was going to out John the Baptist. He was going to grow in that model and be a solitary desert ascetic. And of course, the first thing he did after he received his baptism in the River Jordan was to go out in the desert for 40 days. I mean, it was all following the same kind of, if androcentric, is that what you call it, model?
Yes, androcentric.
Yeah, of the way the solitary male pursues the path. And then bang, who knows how and why the first meeting, but he's suddenly in the presence of the Mary Magdalene, and he knows, I think instantly in that moment, that it isn't going to look quite like the plot as originally written, and that his life was going to be lived in the tension between old style prophecy, the old Ezekiel's and Jeremiah's, and something new that was much more geared toward healing, towards exorcism, which is the other part of it, that I think that Jesus actually knew a lot more about the shamanic traditions, as we call them today, than the church is willing to credit. That he knew how to work with the earth. He knew how to work with the earth-based knowledge of healing. Uh, and again, there are clues for that all through the gospel, but that we don't pay attention to because we just pass right by him when we tell the story. He did everything because he was the Son of God. I think Mary Magdalene basically called Jesus to the path of kenosis, or substituted love, rather than the path of prophetic clarity and judgment. I mean, she was the one who actually flipped him into what he was on earth to do, which had been predicted by the prophet Ezekiel. I will take away your heart of stone and give you a heart of flesh. Well, he had to go through that in his own personal life. And out of that, he learned and he forwarded a path that doesn't have anything to do with, celibacy or male entitlement or hierarchy, that as the heart bends and learns to surrender and learns to be gentle, which it can do in any tradition, uh, uh, spiritual spiritual enlightenment is attained. It's not exclusively reserved for male celibates. She weaned his path away from the John the Baptist models to uncharted waters, that we have not yet to take him up on fully.
To me, this whole discussion we're having here today is about refinding the balance between masculine, feminine, in both in ourselves and in the world at large, and particularly within religious institutions and foundations. Because before the patriarchy, it was the time of the goddess. So what do you think that the feminine brings to the table of spirituality and indeed to the world today of, increasing happiness, generally happiness and lessening suffering? And what does the feminine have to offer? I'll go to Wendy. Wendy, what do you think the feminine has to offer?
What I think we've lost in erasing the women and the feminine aspect, and I'll use that word also in Buddhism, is also the relational models that the women brought forward early on. It was not the solitary journey to enlightenment that the Buddha is portrayed as having undertaken. It was a relational journey, and the women were always finding potential and possibility as a collective of women, and they found power and strength and support among themselves. And that is a theme that begins from the moment you meet. Mahaprajapati is more or less the leader or the most familiar of the women, but the whole journey, her whole life, from the time she became queen to the time of her death, was in this sort of within this relational assembly of women. And in fact, they all chose their parinirvana, their death moments together. So I think we've lost that. I think that's something the feminine brings that the male tends to ignore or isolate. But when the oral traditions were written down, they were written down in many different ways. And the stories that are most illuminating to what I feel was the original way they were told, which always included women in the sacred feminine and this notion of the earth and our in the inseparability of ourselves with the earth, I feel come to us today more intact through those stories that were recorded directly from the oral traditions without going through what I call the monastic filter. And the monastic filter would say, oh no, let's strip this out and strip that out. It's too much of the feminine, too much of the female. And I agree it's not gendered. I think that the wisdom and nurturance of the earth belongs to all of us. It has become gendered, and I think that's just a tool that we can use, but obviously men and women can cultivate that potential equally.
Yeah. Yes. Cynthia.
Well, I find that actually a much more complex question than it looks on the surface, because I think in the final analysis, it's not about balance, but it's about a fusion at a whole new level in a new structure of consciousness. And I'm a great believer in, and a great fan of the maps of the evolutions of the structures of consciousness, particularly the one of Jean Gebser, that says that each of these great eras of conscious history have got their unique place. And of course, the earlier days of matriarchal culture were boomerang back by a domination of male culture, which has basically continued up to our day. But it's not just going to swing back to a balance point. What people are really seeing is that we need to step forward into a whole new shared understanding of what it means to be a human being. As I've looked at the women mystics in the Christian tradition and leaders that I've been most gravitated to, the fruit of their work, the fruit of their integration of male and female looks different from almost anything. They can be very, very fierce. They can be as some of them sitting in the desert were as separated and as isolated and as rigid and as any of the guys. But when they come together, there's a kind of holistic profundity. When you look at Julian of Norwich or Hildegard of von Bingen, or Hedwig, these brilliant mystics, right down to Teresa of Lisieux, they speak with an absolute authority and power, which is yet gentle. It's not aggressive. It's not brutalizing. It's not rigid, but it's absolutely fierce. And all I can say is it's rounded. And the male and the female are profoundly integrated within their being. These women are movers and shakers, but they do it in a way that honors and redeems the wholeness of creativity, of nature. And I think that's a foretaste of what we're going to see in the new structure of consciousness as it emerges.
I feel there's a ripening, there's a receptivity that there wasn't, say, 100 years ago. And I get that feedback from people. I mean, in Buddhism, in Tibetan Buddhism, there's the notion of the terma, or something that is hidden until it's ready to be found, ready to be understood. And I feel that these stories in many ways have been hidden and have been not seen because we weren't ready for them. And I feel we're ready for them now. And I always encourage when I teach the stories, don't just listen to me, keep telling them, keep telling them. I want the paradigm of Buddhism to shift, to integrate now what we've lost, integrate the feminine now into it. In terms of the Dharma centers and the integration there, I still see male dominance a lot. But in terms of the monastic world, I'm not a nun. I can't speak for how the changes are appearing, but I'm very heartened by the organization, Sakyadhita, for example, that it speaks for the nuns and for equality within the monastic world. I'm very heartened by the nunneries that are being founded, for example, by Jetsun Tenzin Pelmo, who give equal teachings of equal caliber to the young women, instead of dumbing down the Dharma or what they're supposed to learn, which was more traditional. The women were getting the dumbed down version, or they were just chanting, or they were housed adjacent to a monastery so they could cook and clean for the men. All that is changing. And I think with the tremendous love and support of His Holiness the Dalai Lama and the Karmapa, and many, many male teachers, scholars that I meet, and also other Buddhist male teachers. It's a big battle. Patriarchy dies hard. I think that the monastic women know that better than any of us. So I think we're ready for them now. And I'm excited about that. And I'm excited to see this work continue through all kinds of different avenues. Certainly not me, just me, but I'm just excited. I think there's a groundswell of interest and excitement around these stories, and restoring Buddhism to the original model of what the Buddha envisioned, which upon his death, he said, I'm ready to die because I feel I've succeeded in bringing the Dharma equally to men and women, lay and monastic. And so he was ready to go. His legacy, he felt, was ready to go. And we're the ones who've messed it up. And I think we're ready to restore what he wanted.
And I think this would be really wonderful if we had the teachings of respect for the female and the feminine accomplishments are more introduced into churches and temples and monasteries, and so that it pervades outwards into a world which has more respect. I was very interested, Wendy, that Mahaprajapati, according to your research, did achieve arhatship. And you even said that her, let me get it right, that her death was more miraculous than the Buddha's, which is extraordinary. And I think if that was well known and taught throughout the Buddhist world, there would be much less disdain towards the feminine in general. And Cynthia, I hope that the stories of Mary Magdalene and her absolute, not just her love and devotion towards Jesus, but her also powerful spiritual attainments herself, and the fact that she was being recognized as the apostle to the apostles, that she actually taught the apostles. She was the head apostle. I hope that gets out too, so that it actually balance. Well, we're not allowed to use balance, but anyway, it kind of evens up and gives much more integration between healthy male, healthy masculine, and healthy feminine.